With that, let's bring in our special coverage on the matter with Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol, and also joining us is Don DeBar, radio host and journalist at CPR News, joining us from New York. Gentlemen, both of you, welcome to the program. I'm going to begin with Mr. Gosling. Mr. Gosling, does the confirmation of talks in Muscat actually underline Iran's firm stance while the U.S. is trying to lead this psychological warfare and media manipulation around the negotiations?
Well, yes, it does look as if the idea is to make out that there is some kind of real negotiation going on. Obviously, it pays for the Iranian government to play along with this, at least if it's just to placate some of the Americans who are not hawks. But we have to remember that when you're negotiating with the Israelis and the United States, that can sometimes be simply for them to gather intelligence to strike you. And so it's quite a dangerous thing to do, to even begin negotiating with the US. And I think as regards the nuclear program, well, what they're always hinting throughout the Western media is that Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons. Well, we know that that is very unlikely. Even Tulsi Gabbard herself, before she was clamped in irons in her job, made it clear she didn't believe that that was the case. That's the Director of National Intelligence in the United States. And what always seems to get forgotten is the presence of the Israeli nuclear program, which is not being scrutinized whatsoever by the UN agencies or really at all by the Western press for decades now. So the Israelis have around about 100 up to, that's what we believe, 100 nuclear weapons. And that's one of the reasons why these talks are so important, actually, is to try and get the use of the presence of nuclear weapons out into the open. Now, remember, back in the Cold War, in the 1970s, 1980s, it was said that nuclear weapons kept the balance of power. The idea was that rival countries, if they both had nuclear weapons, would not strike each other because of the devastating consequences for themselves if they did that. And so there is an argument to say that the Iranians should have nuclear weapons. The only trouble is they are immoral. And the Iranians have, I think, rightly said, as the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament here in the United Kingdom says, that we should not have nuclear weapons because of the nature of the indiscriminate nature and the mass killing of civilians and the hideous fallout that comes from with the use of these weapons. And so they are totally unethical. And that's why we had the arms reduction talks back in the 1980s, which were actually very successful under Reagan and Thatcher, etc., with the Russians, to limit the possibility of this kind of thing happening. And so, yes, it's very good that they're talking, but I think the Iranians have to beware of any negotiations with the United States being in good faith.
Exactly. Mr. DeBar, also welcome to the program. I wanted your thoughts on the same question, and why do you think that Washington is still pushing to expand the agenda of the negotiations to something beyond a nuclear file?
Well, the nuclear weapons are weapons. They're not the goal of the policy goal. I mean, no, even insane people don't want to see nuclear devastation as the end result of their work. This is not what they're working towards. They may be working towards it as a consequence of the stupid things they do, blinded by their greed and lust for power, but they have objectives that are not mushroom clouds, or that may result in mushroom clouds, rather than they want mushroom clouds. So what are those goals? The goals are, domination of the resources and the people of the planet. They want unlimited, they want to own the entire planet. They have been, pretty successful at getting most of the way there. There's been an ebb and flow of, the tide of their empire over the past, say, since the post-World War II period began in 1945. Again, since the fall of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union dismantling into the constituent states that exist there now, Russia was kind of in a difficult situation for 15, 20 years. And China also turned inward for, a long period, the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. The situation on the ground now is different. The people who have, envisioned themselves as the masters of the universe are now looking at real, powers contending for that role, or just contending for freedom for people on this planet. In the real world, you've got BRICS and the various multilateral constructs that are rising up all over the place that involve billions of people and billions of dollars in wealth and resources and unlimited potential outside the clutches of their grip. They don't like that. So they're looking to change it. We see the attempt to take down Russia, the various attempts, but the most recent one being the taking of Ukraine, the attempted coups in Belarus and in Kazakhstan that were coordinate with that, and also Georgia and Azerbaijan and Armenia, those things. The placement of various types of anti-missile missiles in the Korean Peninsula and elsewhere in the Asian theater. All of these things tell the same story as what we're looking at with respect to Iran. We want to own you, and if we can't own you, look at Iraq and Libya and others for the example of what your fate will be. Iran is standing up to it, rightly so. Now, and the real question is, what role is Trump really playing? Because on the one hand, we see him standing shoulder to shoulder with Netanyahu and funded by, various big-time Israel funders. On the other hand, we have the example of what happened with Kim Jong-un that was only thwarted by the U.S. Congress, which was after making the same kind of bellicose claims for, months and months that was going to happen with North Korea. When he sat down with Kim Jong-un, they came this close to a peace treaty, which has been waiting since 1953. I'm hoping that's what we're looking at now, and that he's actually hoping to find some sort of accommodation that will allow him to make peace with Iran without Iran having to pretend or be subjugated to the United States. We'll see, though. We'll see.
Mr. Gosling, Mr. DeBar believes and actually hopes for a peace treaty between the U.S. and Israel. I have two questions here. My first one is, given the collapse of the June talks between the U.S. and Iran, don't you think that the real problem here is the lack of trust in Washington? And secondly, do you think that Israel will allow a peace treaty happening between Iran and the U.S.?
Look, the Israelis may well try and stop it, but I think we have to understand, Don is absolutely right, what the United States is really looking for here with Israel as its a proxy is domination, world domination. And this is just part of the tactics. I mean, Trump seems to be maybe losing his mind, because what about 7 years ago? What happened? He had a fantastic agreement called the JCPOA with Iran, which he pulled out of in May 2018. And so maybe he's having second thoughts, or maybe he's just not got a very good memory. You do wonder with Donald Trump. I would say most likely, though, there are maneuverings and machinations by the Israel lobby behind the scenes that Trump may now be pushing back against slightly, particularly since the devastation in Gaza has become particularly clear, this genocide. And by the way, since the ceasefire was signed earlier this year, we've had over 500 deaths in Palestine still from the bombardment, the cowardly bombardment of civilians by the Israelis. I just want to add one little thing from Bristol today, because it's not been in the British and the UK and Western news at all, which is 6 courageous young people here in the UK. They got a van and they smashed it through the doors of an Israeli arms company called Elbit Systems in this city here. And they did a massive amount of damage to electronic equipment, drones, etc., being manufactured by Israel as part of the genocide. And I'm very glad to say our British justice system and our jury actually delivered a not guilty verdict to all of these 6 people who, by the way, have been being imprisoned on remand, which is unprecedented. This is really a form of internment for the last 18 months, and they are now about to be freed because the justice system has said there was no crime in that attack on that arms factory because it was stopping a greater crime. So we're celebrating really here in the city tonight.
And Mr. Dabar, my question, how have the lessons of the 12-day war reshaped Iran's position in these nuclear talks? And how serious do you see the threat of an Israeli interference in these round of talks as well?
Israel has a tremendous, well, actually, let's be very clear. Those who have control of what they call the state of Israel have tremendous influence and power within the halls of government in Washington as well. Whether they are Americans controlling Israel or Israelis controlling American policy or some other third party is really irrelevant in terms of looking at what the operation of this thing is and what needs to stop. First, the state of Israel needs to be dismantled and the land returned to the people who belongs to it, the Palestinians. And that should be one of the primary objectives of anyone who wants to see peace in that part of the world and who has, by the way, any interest in following the maxim that was declared by people around the world after World War II, never again, because that is the locus of the again at this point in our history. The need here is to find out whether or not, well, look, Trump is going to show us his hand at some point because he has to. But the institutional power here that placed Israel into the position of prominence that it has, armed it, and works in coordination with it. And any attempt to make peace with Iran and disregard what instructions might come out of Israel is going to be met with resistance, deep and broad resistance in the U.S. government. So that's going to have to be addressed. I assume if Trump intends to actually do this, that he's aware of it. He saw the kind of, rebound that he had to deal with when he tried to make peace in Ukraine. He almost got impeached for it. But I'm hoping that there are some people that are working with him that understand exactly what's going on and will help navigate this problem. Netanyahu should be forced to resign from office and be criminally prosecuted. That should happen anyway, no matter what happens with this immediate situation. And Iran should be made to know that it is secure its position there from Israel, and Israel needs to be instructed that if it makes war in the area, it's going to be cut off from any funding from the United States, which should happen anyway, by the way.
And Mr. Gosling, my final question, if diplomacy fails or deliberately derailed, what options does Iran have this time in event of a military confrontation, and how do you think that would change the power dynamics in the region?
Well, the United States needs to be careful about a military confrontation because both the US carrier strike group with USS Abraham Lincoln and the Israeli capital and military facilities are likely to be hit in a devastating fashion if the United States does. But you know what? I think more likely, and this could be destabilized by the Israel lobby in the United States, but I think what we're looking at with Trump is literally his book. Read it, The Art of the Deal. What he does is he's threatening. 2 weeks ago, he's threatening to attack Iran. Now he's sitting around the table. What he wants, I think, is a deal. Whether the Israelis in Washington, the lobby in there, a very powerful lobby, will allow that to happen, people like Jared Kushner, etc., is another question. And it's interesting, Netanyahu, I think, is rattled right now. Today he said to Steve Witkoff, apparently, so I'm reading in the US papers, that Iran can't be trusted. He feels it necessary to go to the Americans and say, don't trust Iran, to try and scupper these peace talks. So I think that there actually may be something. And Oman is a relatively swing state, isn't it? So it's an interesting place to be doing this. And the Americans would rather be in somewhere like Saudi Arabia, but it's actually a good venue, I think, Muscat, for the talks. And I am, of course, hopeful, even though I am also will not be surprised if the Israel lobby really does topple the table over at the talks.
And Mr. Debar, your final thoughts on the last question.
Just a caveat. When Trump met in his first term, met with Vladimir Putin and had the negotiations with Kim Jong-un, and was having discussions also with Iran that had turned from acrimony into actual negotiations. The U.S. Congress passed a bill that said that the president cannot undo any of the sanctions regimes that have been imposed, either by previous presidential executive order or by congressional action, without the approval of the Congress. And this was passed in the 535-seat Congress, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, almost unanimously. There were 6 or 7 people that didn't vote yet.
Yes.
So he's looking at the potential of that kind of a backlash in the Congress. I hope he's figured out a path around that, if that's where we are.
Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol, and also Don DeBar, radio host and journalist, joining us from New York. Thank you both.